What if I told you that the improvements being released by your camera manufacturer are going to render your camera useless when it comes time for your next photo shoot? This video today was not planned. It was not scheduled. There was no thought in my mind of releasing this video. This is simply an impromptu video after the recent release by Canon of their firmware update that once again is causing tons of problems for its users. I don't know about you guys, but this is becoming pretty frustrating. I don't really recall a time in history where firmware updates were causing so many problems with cameras and the end user, right? I'm pretty frustrated about this, and I don't know how you guys feel as well, but it seems to be affecting all of the major camera brands, Sony, Nikon, Canon, and there's a lot of other smaller companies, quite honestly, some that I'm not even familiar with. But in doing a little bit of research for this video, there were several other companies who were also releasing firmware updates for their products. And it was basically having the same effects that we're seeing across all the major camera manufacturers, turning cameras into bricks, right? Really impacting some of the features that your camera uses, such as autofocus, or it's compromising subject detection. It's causing problems with tethering. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But at what point is enough enough? You know, I love Sony products and I've been a loyal Sony user for quite some time, but I have not upgraded to version 3.0 or 3.01 or whatever the version after that is, 3.1, 3.01. I think it's 3.01, but nonetheless, everyone continues to report sluggish autofocus, issues with subject recognition. And quite honestly, I'm just really not in the mood to deal with that. I didn't buy a $6,500 camera to have compromised performance. And so I'm sorry, but Sony, I'm talking to you. You need to do better. Your customers deserve better. We spend a lot of money on your products. We need the updates and we need them to be correct. And this goes for Nikon and Canon too. For anyone out there using their products, it's time to do better. We as the customers need to demand more from these companies. Now, I don't know exactly what the solution is to make this happen. Perhaps you guys have some suggestions, but things need to change. We're spending way too much money on this camera equipment to not have it work or to have all of these problems. Again, I'm not going to spend $6,500 to have crappy autofocus performance. That's just not acceptable in my eyes. But I wanted to take a look at some of the information, that I was researching and looking over the past year, and this is just the past year alone, to kind of see what's going on. So I just kind of want to take a look at some of these things. I've touched on them briefly, but I want to take a look at them a little bit more closely. So let's do it kind of by camera manufacturer. You'll excuse me if I'm kind of referencing my computer here, but just because I made some notes and I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. But we'll start with Sony. So in September of 2024, the A7R5, which I have actually, I'm using this right now to film this video. That's the camera that I use. But the firmware caused a complete shutdown of the camera. People were making these updates and the camera wouldn't even start up. It turned it into a brick. And people were scrambling. I mean, what are you supposed to do if you're a wedding photographer, if you're a portrait photographer, and you think, I'm going to update this firmware, make sure I fix all the bugs and don't have any issues, and you do, and all of a sudden your camera turns into a brick. What do you do if by chance you're getting ready to photograph someone's wedding and you do this, 3 or 4 days before the wedding, thinking, okay, I'll do it now, right? Be good, be all set to go. I'll be all up to date, won't have to worry about anything. And all of a sudden your camera shuts down. I mean, that makes it really hard at that point to even go online to lensrental.com or, what have you, where you can rent photography equipment. I don't even think you can get something that quickly to yourself, right? Where you could rent something even for the wedding. I mean, what are people supposed to do who are making their living, making their livelihood using their camera? I mean, I understand that you're pushing out another firmware update, but what is happening where there are so many issues? And I feel like the issues aren't just little things, little glitches here or there where you can still function with your camera. I feel like these are big. I mean, bricking your camera, that's a big issue, right? That's not acceptable. You're going to tell me that I update my firmware and now my camera doesn't work? Can you imagine if you updated your computer, every time you updated your computer, it just turned into a brick? Why are we having so many issues with this? Now, I don't have, admittedly, I don't have the background in what happens with these specific updates, these firmware updates, how they're made, how they're pushed out, right? I don't have that technological information to understand that. I just know I own a camera and there's a firmware update coming out to update the software in the camera, and there's a lot of problems with it. That's what I care about, right? As a photographer who owns the camera. So Sony had several of these issues. It was with their Sony a7R5. In mid of 2024, they released an update for the FX30 and immediately pulled it due to unspecified issues. Sony then, of course, released 3.0 and 3.01, which caused several reported issues, including autofocusing issues. People are still reporting sluggish autofocusing. Come on, Sony, let's go. Get a new update out that fixes these issues. This is one complaint that I have with Sony, is that if you own an older model, the firmware updates seem to be a little bit lacking. Well, you know what? Didn't change the fact that we still spent $6,500 on your camera. You need to put out better updates. And not only that, continued updates. So let's get this going, Sony. Let's get autofocusing improved for the Sony A1 and some of these older cameras that are out there. It's time to do it, and it's time to do it right. Nikon. I really didn't find too much on Nikon, and if I'm missing something, please share it in the comments below. I just really saw an update from May 20th of this year, and it really was a firmware update that was fixing a previous version, the 2.0 firmware update, which was previously crashing cameras. So Nikon seems to be the one manufacturer that's not showing up as much with these issues. But still, they released a firmware update that crashed cameras, turned them into bricks. What is happening? Canon just released a new firmware update. Problems all over the place, right? You can see it here on YouTube. People are posting videos of all the problems they're having. So the reported problems apparently are playback failure on both camera or PC when using pre-recording video mode with CF Express cards over 2 terabytes. Canon pulled the firmware within hours and advised users not to install it, even if they already downloaded it. It looks like on the R1, there was an additional bug. If the shooting mode switch was set to silent shutter switching or disable, the camera could fail to operate properly after updating. Again, I just don't understand what is happening here. With the cost of these cameras, you need to service the customer. I mean, this is basic stuff, and I don't understand why every firmware update seems to have an issue. And the severity of the issues is concerning. What do you guys think? I want to know what everyone else out there is thinking who owns these other cameras. If there are firmware issues that have been released that I didn't cover here, I just really, honestly, I didn't do the deepest dive. I just wanted to kind of go high level with this video and really just kind of try to get an idea of what's happened over the past year with firmware updates. I mean, this is enough. But if there's other things out here with, especially with the major camera manufacturers, I kind of want to know, right? There was, like I said, there were other companies, smaller companies that have products, and again, their firmware updates were causing issues too. But I'm a little bit more concerned with the big three or other well-known camera brands and what's going on with the firmware updates, because this is clearly an issue. This has become kind of commonplace. And I know we look at it, right? And the best practice, if you will, is when a firmware comes out, it's probably good to wait somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks before you go ahead and update that firmware so that you can see what bugs are being worked out. Is it me, or is that ridiculous? I mean, I understand that it's a smart thing to do, but it doesn't mean that makes it the right thing to do. We should be able to trust that you put out a firmware update that's going to work. I mean, isn't this what you do as a camera company? Isn't this part of your job? Why are we accepting these camera manufacturers and their inability to do their jobs properly? This is really frustrating me, if you can't tell. And I don't care what camera manufacturer we're talking about. Everyone is guilty of it right now, and it needs to change. Sony, Nikon, Canon, you need to do better, period. You need to do better. And as your customers, we demand that you do better. I don't know, maybe it's me, but I think, if you look at the statistics, I feel like sales are down for a lot of camera manufacturers. I don't think people are buying cameras the same way as they used to, because there's a lot of other options out there now. There's always going to be your group of hardcore photographers like myself, right? Who are always going to want a camera like this, a mirrorless camera. But there's a lot of people out there that are on the fence, that could be swayed into buying a quote unquote real camera. But when we have all this negative stuff going on around firmware updates and cameras not working, what's the motivation to buy one? I just like to know what you guys think. If you're sharing my frustrations, I feel like my frustrations are clearly obvious. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Again, this was completely unplanned. I just had this thought in my mind, this frustration. Just wanted to put it out there to see what everyone else is thinking when it comes to this. Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just going to leave it there, and I'll see you soon.